I think most of us locally thought that the issue of Heathrow had been laid to rest in 2010, and we were very grateful for that. So it's depressing to find that we're having to fight this battle all over again. Now, many of you will have been all over London and seen the advertising campaigns for the expansion of Heathrow, and the people who want that have a right to do that. But people like you and I, individuals who live in the area who are affected, need to have a way to fight back and answer back. That's why the council, across party, has agreed to run a referendum to give you, the people of the borough, the chance to make a big sound collectively and fight back against those who have the money that we do not.
Planes coming into Heathrow overfly almost 100,000 Londoners at low altitude, causing huge noise disturbance, particularly at night with planes coming in from 4:30 in the morning. The traffic coming in and out of Heathrow, together with the aircraft themselves, contribute to London's dreadful air pollution that kills thousands of Londoners prematurely each year. Carbon emissions from aircraft are the fastest growing source of greenhouse emissions and climate change gases, and it just isn't sustainable in the long term for us to be growing our desire and need to fly.
So Heathrow expansion would be wrong on almost every level, the most obvious being the cost to our quality of life. There are already hundreds of thousands of people whose lives are very badly affected by Heathrow noise, and if we allow Heathrow to be expanded, and we're not just talking about a third runway, we're talking about a fourth runway as well, I think that's accepted, potentially we're looking at doubling the number of people who are affected. Well, it's already the case, according to the CAA, that 30% of all Europeans who live in conditions which are intolerable as a result of aircraft noise live in and around Heathrow. It shows just how big an impact Heathrow has. And there is also the financial cost. But it's not just a strip of tarmac or two strips of tarmac that are being laid out in a particular area. We would have to reconfigure London. We'd need to deal with an additional 23 million extra road passenger journeys to and from Heathrow, which would cause gridlock. So the costs cannot be exaggerated.
HECAN doesn't believe there's an environmental or economic case for a third runway at Heathrow. Already 725,000 people live under the flight paths to Heathrow. That is astonishingly 28% of all people impacted by aircraft noise right across Europe. If a third runway was built, an additional 150,000 people would be under the Heathrow flight paths. In other words, virtually 1 million people would be affected by noise from Heathrow. We just don't think that is justified. We think it would require a very strong economic argument to justify increasing the noise over West London and over the home counties. And we don't believe that economic argument exists.
London is the greatest commercial trading city on earth, and in my view, we do need more runway capacity to compete with our rivals in Europe and around the world. But the one place you can't do that is Heathrow Airport, which already produces so much noise pollution that we have 750,000 people suffering excess noise pollution around the Heathrow area. If you put in a third runway, the misery for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Londoners would be aggravated. And as soon as you put in a third runway, say by 2026 or 2028, you would immediately need a fourth runway, an environmental catastrophe for our city.
Anyone living under the flight paths in places like Kew and Richmond will understand what aircraft landing overhead at 4:30 in the morning feels like. It's a way of life for residents in this borough, being woken up in the night by aircraft.
The majority of residents on my side of the river are, I think, primarily concerned with the negative impacts of noise, which are very serious, mainly in takeoffs to the east when the wind is in that direction, and for a relatively small number of residents who are very close to the landing flight path, all the problems associated with that. But there are a significant number of residents who are also concerned about the wider environmental impacts, but I think it's predominantly noise. To offset that, there is a significant minority who work at the airport who regard Heathrow as their source of livelihood. Large numbers of others, including myself, who use the airport as a business traveller. And I think we have to understand the economic importance of Heathrow as well as the environmental problems it creates.
I think the starting point is the economic situation that the UK is in at the moment. We have to find ways of getting to new markets, in particular the emerging markets, and that is about air travel, and it's about more air travel. The difficult truth is that in the short term, it's not clear how you can do anything other than address more flights out of Heathrow as the way to keep us ticking over in this, I mean, we may be talking 20-year period while we think about what we might want to do next with actually building more runways or building new airports. On climate change, I think the raw truth is that people will have to fly to these emerging markets one way or another, and so we need to consider whether we're simply shifting traffic from Heathrow to Amsterdam or Paris. The Independent Committee on Climate Change did say that we could cope with the expansion of demand within our climate limits. So up to certainly the sort of foreseeable forecasts, we can do that within the agreed climate change limits. When it comes to the longer term, I guess you've essentially got two options. One is we have an existing hub, and in a way the benchmark should be expanding the existing hub. So can you do better than that somewhere else? The alternative is to put a hub somewhere else and create it from scratch, or to create it by bolting it on to, say, Gatwick or Stansted or even Birmingham. Those solutions potentially are even more difficult than Heathrow in terms of making them happen, because you've got to put all the road and rail access in as well as create the airport.
I think if it's better access to more countries and things like that, because my parents live in France, and at the moment it's quite hard for me to get there without having to go to Luton Airport or somewhere a bit further away. Yeah. So if that meant that there was more flights available to other parts of the world, then that would be really good.
I think the expansion of Heathrow will affect residents in a bad way, really. It's going to affect them in terms of just the normal things of extra traffic, noise pollution, all those kind of things which have been talked about a lot in the press, and they're real concerns for the residents.
It'll both retain jobs and create new employment. It'll maintain Heathrow's position as one of the premier airports in Europe, if not in the world. And it'll maintain its function as a hub airport to vie with places like Amsterdam and Frankfurt.
In terms of noise, already it impacts on our quality of life when we're in the garden, for example. I can only imagine that would get worse. When we're on Richmond Green, for example, which is a gorgeous area, we notice that frequently, so that does detract from the enjoyment of the area. I imagine that people visiting the area would notice that as well.
Send a signal to the government that it needs to think again on Heathrow. Say no to night flights. Say no to a third runway, let alone a fourth runway, which is their secret agenda. Say no to expansion at Heathrow.
During May, the council is holding a ballot of residents referendum style survey, and I do hope that residents will use the opportunity to cast their no votes to show politicians in government and elsewhere that people feel really strongly about Heathrow expansion in this area, and indeed any politician who pursues this policy nationally is going to be damaged at the ballot box in future elections if they don't listen to the strength of feeling of Richmond residents today.
Please vote in the referendum. The last day is on May the 16th. Whatever you think about Heathrow, and I'm sure most of you will agree with the Council that we don't want expansion, do have your say. It's your chance for your voice and that of tens and thousands of others to be heard. It will not come again. Don't miss the chance to cast your vote.